G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with a movie for the Equals project, specifically the hot topic. And this hot topic is, imagine there's no religion. And even though it's kind of a misquote because John Lennon actually said, imagine there's no countries and no religion too. But let's just have a look at the idea of imagining that there is no religion. Now, religion, it's kind of like a herd behaviour, isn't it? Traditional, ritual, gatherings, where people go and they line up in neat straight rows and they do whatever they've been taught is going to result in some intangible God theory paying more attention to what they think is good for them than if they talk to their God theory on their own. If they talk to their God theory on their own, it's not called a religion, is it? It's called a spiritual belief system. So imagine there's no religion. Malt liquor. I see, that's a kind of a spiritual belief, the idea that I can send my good wishes to everybody who's part of the YouTube drinking community. Is that a religious belief? Probably not. Not many malt liquor drinkers pay attention to me because they think I know better than they can figure out what the God theory has in mind for life in the universe, let alone for them to do about it. No, so that's not a religious belief. But the idea that I can send me good vibes to them because there's more to life than what can be seen and touched and felt and measured, which is at the essence of a spiritual belief system or spiritual observations. Yeah. Saying malt liquor and hoping the good vibes go, that's a spiritual belief. So to try and amputate religion, or the idea that a whole bunch of people can try and share the same spiritual belief system because, I don't know, once upon a time somebody's great-grandfather had an uncle who talked to an angel who told him how it's supposed to be, or because somebody found it carved on a stone or burnt on a paper or engraved in gold tablets, or it was told to him in a dream. There are people who reckon they know what the God theory has in mind. Even if you got a satellite with a neurosynaptic reprogramming beam or ray and put the satellite in a geostationary orbit over the equator, and when the international dateline comes past you can turn your beam on and spend 24 hours irradiating the frontal lobes of everybody on planet Mudball so that they wake up in the morning and they've got no understanding of religion. They'd sort of look at the church and think, gee, maybe we better do what they're actually doing in England at the moment, which is a whole bunch of people who have no religious affiliation turn up at the local church and get lectured on how to live their life better. And they sing songs and they play games like cards and bingo and stuff, and it's got absolutely everything that a religious church used to have, including the building, but they don't have anybody talking about God theory. It's just a community meeting centre. So yeah, that's what I think would happen in a world without religion, is people would start making their own spiritual observations, and they'd come to the same sort of conclusions that people have been blaming on religions for centuries. You know, people would notice that he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. You know, it's not a religious observation, it's a biological, statistical observation that when primates fight a lot, they get kicked out of their home territory and they have to go somewhere else to live, and there they don't fit in and they fight a lot over there too, and the more they fight off their territory, the more they lose. The more often they lose. So humans are primates, and this kind of means if the American killer monkeys want to beat the Afghan killer monkeys, they're going to have to get the Afghan killer monkeys to come back to America to have the fight there. Because as long as the Americans are going off their home terrain, because nobody wants them where they come from because they like fighting too much, go off their home terrain and have lots of fights a long way away from home, they're going to get beaten every time, you know, like Vietnam, Iraq, Absurdistan, Iraq, Absurdistan still. Yeah? So thou shalt not kill. It's not actually a bad bit of advice, and whether you want to put it down to divine revelation or considered observation, it's still the same advice. You know, the statistics say that in America, people who are in the military veterans, not combat veterans, just joining the military and saying, sir, yes, sir, for a few years, that gives you about 5 times the rate of being homeless and twice the rate of being diagnosed with a psychiatric illness and twice the suicide rate. I don't know what the suicide rate is for American combat veterans, but recently I heard that the American military makes up 1% of the national population, but it has 20% of the national suicides. I know in Australia the Department of Health and Welfare Statistics ran figures on veterans' morbidity and mortality and the morbidity and mortality of their children. They found that in Australia, combat veterans' children had 3 times the suicide rate of the background population. So a military veteran has twice the suicide rate, but a combat veteran's kid has 3 times the suicide rate. And the comvet's kid also had 1.8 times the death by accident rate and 1.2 times the death by illness rate. So they're looking at 4 times the normal death rate because their parent was a combat veteran. So apart from the idea of taking your DNA to war and getting it turned into compost, you come back with the idea that your kid has got 4 times the death rate. So, thou shalt not kill, they who live by the sword shall die by the sword. Is that a scientific observation built into a culture and enshrined in the language and the tradition? I don't know. It's not fucking wrong anyway. The idea that society gives a license to people to have the kind of sex which may result in babies, and that this gets solemnised in the community centre after people put up notice of intention to get married, so that anybody who's got a reason why you shouldn't be getting these two married can come and, you know, have their little say and speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, once upon a time in Europe, there were no social security services or nets or safety shit, you know. Unmarried mothers were hunted out of the municipal boundaries because if they gave birth inside the municipal boundary, the town council was responsible for their care and support and that of the child. And they didn't want to do it. The ratepayers weren't interested. So they'd hunt the pregnant women out of town and make them give birth on their own in the forest. And if they survived that, they could raise the kid on fucking acorns for all the townies cared. And now we've got all this modern information on things like a newborn baby until it's 3 years old. Every minute it's awake, it expects that 38 times a minute when it whimpers, it's going to have a loving, regular carer, i.e. parent, sibling, uncle, aunt, next door neighbour, granny, grandpa, look them in the eye in return 38 times a minute. Yeah? 25 times a minute is minimum to get a happy kid. 28 times a minute is how often a chimpanzee looks at the group leader. So back in medieval times, an unmarried mother would probably be lucky if they got a job 12 hours a day cleaning or washing or scrubbing floors to pay the rent and buy the food for the kid that she's raising if the kid survived infancy. So the kid grows up with not enough eye contact moments, not enough cuddles, not enough food, not enough clothes, not enough anything, because it hasn't got 2 biological parents. And if it's an orchid child and it needs really good raising, it'll grow up to be a absolute fucking raving selfish psychopath trying to get its own back on society. And you get all this crap built into the society like linguistic blocks, you know, observations distilled from centuries which have been handed down in offhand expressions that people use without thinking about the meaning. Lonely as a bastard, miserable as a bastard, hungry as a bastard, vicious as a bastard, reckless as a bastard, dangerous as a bastard, hopeless as a bastard. Because children are biologically programmed to expect 2 biological parents. And society has got these thousands of years long tradition to license sex which may be theoretically reproductive. So yeah, the church likes having a bit of a say in who gets married, to whom, and when, and why, and all the rest of it. Take away the religions and people are going to come up with the same observations. You know, the peace, love, brown rice, free love, pleasure principle, we've got the pill and we've got penicillin and we've got abortions on demand, that generation. Yeah, their kids aren't so fucking keen on Brady bunches. The only reason they do it is because they've role modelled on it. They've got no bloody idea how to make a relationship stick together and work. So, in my opinion, the observed levels of synchronicity, benevolent coincidence within society, pretty much nails down that random cascading chances bullshit. So people are going to make spiritual observations. They're going to decide there's more to life than what you can see and touch and feel and measure because there are patterns in it. The cosmic scoreboard effect really actually works. You know, like Chaucer said, Mordre will out. You can't hide a murder. It just doesn't work. So people are going to notice that there's a cosmic scoreboard effect, or there's a karma, or there's kismet, or there's fate, or the great wheel of life. Yeah? People are going to notice, even if you use your super duper banish religion ray, people are going to reinvent it. And there's always going to be somebody who gets their understanding of how the spiritual part of the universe works close enough to being right that they get a kind of a spiritual confirmation from what they're going to see as their God theory, however their God theory works. And it's a distinct possibility that some of them are going to decide, oh, I've had this spiritual confirmation, therefore I've got my God theory on my side, and whatever I decide is going to be ticked off in heaven by God because I've had this one major spiritual event. It is my understanding, not my religion but my spiritual belief, that those people are mistaken. My understanding is that if you listen to the distilled essence of all of the religions that people have cooked up all over the planet, they all seem to agree that it is better to be selfless and it is better to be non-resistant. And the further you diverge from those principles, then the less likelihood there is of whatever your God theory is giving you any assistance in any situation you find yourself in. Just my point of view. People are going to reinvent God theories. And the kind of synchronicity that I'm talking about, it doesn't have to be world-shattering. You know, it can be something fairly simple. Like I remember being 15 years old, seeing a hippie singing and playing a guitar on the TV, and he had these round glasses, and I thought, gee, they look cool, I'd like to get myself a pair of them. And I heard people talk about them as being Pebble glasses, and I heard that Mexicans used to go blind for generations, picking up river pebbles, looking for crystals, worn round by the river, and holding the crystals up to the light, to the sun, and it was the sunlight that was sending them blind, and they were looking for perfectly round pebbles made of crystal with no cracks, which could have two lenses, identical size, identical thickness, cut out of them for the United States railroad drivers. The train drivers needed sunglasses. So that's what Pebble glasses were. I knew that much. But I grew up in a social black hole. I'd never heard of John Lennon. I thought that, you know, it was pretty funny that the Beatles were discovered by the Seekers and they found them under the Rolling Stones. But I hadn't listened to any of the music. 1980, November or December. It was later than October. I started there in October 80. I was a student nurse living in the nurses' home. Went down the main street of Sydney, found by accident a pair of them round glasses that I'd admired for so long. Went and bought them. Pretty high grade, you know. They got gold spray painted on the inside of Polaroid lenses that are purple on the outside. Just, you know, Mickey Mouse for looking like a hippie. I'd had them for about a week. And if I'd known how pretentious I looked wearing them, I would never have bought them. because I didn't know who John Lennon was. But a week after I bought them, I heard the bloke in the next room to mine freaking out. Oh no, they've shot him, they've shot John Lennon. And I had to turn the radio on to find out who John Lennon was, because I honestly didn't know. And of course, having paid for the things, I wasn't going to stop wearing them. And I enjoyed looking like a hippie for about 10 years. But visiting a hippie commune, talking to some actual hippies with my baby son on my hip, he reached up and grabbed me hippie glasses and threw them on the ground and scratched the lenses. So I don't get to wear them very often because it's a bit irritating having scratches on the lens. But it's funny, when he grew up and got to be 17, his adolescent rebellion was to stop smoking pot and get a job. Let that be a lesson in synchronicity and coincidence. And for whatever it's worth, them's my thoughts on a life without religion, world without religion. I spent 10 years as an atheist, and I had to give it up because I came across observational evidence that there's more to life than what you can see and touch and feel and measure. So I developed a spiritual belief system. And then I found a book of God theories that backed up more or less what I was on the track of figuring out. Very pleasantly for a book of God theories, it actually says not to live your life according to any book. And it more or less says everything in this book may be wrong. And it suggests that individuals should try and figure out by their own connection to the creator of the universe, which I take as being the collective conscious awareness of all the life on every planet that's in the life zone around every star that you can see in the sky at night, a sort of a scaled up Gaia effect or a panentheism. But you can take the religion out of the people on the earth if you can develop your magic ray, or you can imagine going back to a time when nobody had thought of religion. But you're not going to remove the evidence for a spiritual side of existence, and people are going to notice it and they'll hatch a new religion. Now, as soon as you turn your back, they'll hatch a new religion. Look at California, they do it all the friggin' time. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.